Greetings to each and every one of you. Technology is woven into the very fabric of our lives, both directly and indirectly, as many around the world have turned to online engagement and digital solutions to carry out their daily activities. However, technology is changing the world in both positive and visible, as well as insidious and invisible ways. Like many of us here present, I've been fighting for years for freedoms, for the protection of the vulnerable and excluded, as well as for the rights of the poor and of indigenous peoples. I have fought, and I continue to do so, for non-discrimination and human dignity of all to be a lived experience. So I welcome the fact that this forum comes at a crucial time and raises important questions, including how can we ensure that technology is used primarily for the benefit of human rights? How can we put in the energy and intelligence to avoid technology harming human rights? How can we avoid digitalization increasing discrimination and inequalities or increasing control and surveillance of people? How can we avoid technology leading to the erosion of our self-determination? Unavoidably addressing the growing influence of illiberal regimes and of unregulated companies has to be part of our thinking. At the heart of the public debate surrounding new technologies are two key issues: trust and privacy. Trust in the collection, storage, purpose, and ultimate use of our personal data. Trust that our fundamental rights and freedoms will be safeguarded in the digital environment. Trust in the promise that technology will ultimately serve the greater good. However, already large-scale breaches of that trust have occurred and have been made public. In the meantime, many more artificial intelligence AI-based systems have been developed and deployed unchecked. These are now known to have direct impacts of perpetuating existing social patterns of bias and discrimination. Allow me to highlight 5 areas of concern. Firstly, smart cities and security policies have proven to be highly detrimental to the protection of human rights. China is a case in point through its smart city model. Millions of surveillance cameras with facial recognition devices associated with predictive analysis methods are used to modernize discriminatory practices against sections of the population, for example, the Uyghur people. Globally, such surveillance cameras are becoming tools for increased social control of populations. More countries are using facial recognition, predictive policing, artificial intelligence-assisted justice, or mass surveillance tools, while others are imposing moratoria on these technologies and their uses, as in the United States. Secondly, censorship tools, internet shutdowns, and communication blackouts have become standard tools of control throughout the world. Last year in Iran, during mass protests against a large increase in the price of fuel, the internet was shut down, protest action was suppressed, and protesters were killed. In Vietnam early this year, the authorities launched an unprecedented crackdown on social media in an attempt to silence public debate over a land dispute. Local servers of Facebook were taken offline, slowing local traffic down until the social platform agreed to significantly increase the censorship of anti-state posts for local users. In the same vein, Belarus disrupted internet access and restricted content online in response to peaceful countrywide protests, thus silencing information about protests and severe police brutality. Thirdly, surveillance technologies targeting journalists, human rights defenders, civil society activists, and dissidents are prevalent, and countries still fail to enforce their duty to protect human rights. Civil society organizations, including my own, have publicly stated this on a number of occasions. There are several examples of European-made dual-use technologies sold all over the world, from Turkey to Egypt and from Libya to China. Fourthly, when states use disinformation tactics, when disinformation becomes a lucrative and professional business, we must also be careful not to allow the excuse of disinformation to be used as a weapon against freedom of expression and public debate. These are under serious threat at the hands of big tech companies, which create their own mechanisms of self-regulation in relation to determining what is true or false and what constitutes hate speech and what does not. This behavior ultimately has an impact on a massive scale on the daily lives of people the world over in terms of their ability to exercise their individual fundamental rights and to have them protected by states. In practice, FIDH and human rights defenders publicize and share human rights work online, We face undue restrictions by Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms which pass judgment on whether or not what we post is political. They also determine the extent of distribution of our content in some countries. This approach effectively limits general global access to information and specific global access to information about human rights violations. In such situations, a lack of reference to international human rights law, a lack of independent oversight mechanisms, and a lack of the rule of law sees governments outsourcing to private companies their responsibilities as both duty bearers and regulators. The risk of letting governments leave matters to self-regulation on an increasing scale or to the will of the market is a real danger. And finally, fifthly, for digitalization to be a real opportunity, we need to develop a human rights-based approach to the development and the use of technologies. The development and ubiquitous spread of AI, with both its wealth of opportunities as well as its risks, remains an unregulated business in relation to its impact on human rights. The pace of the technological advances of private companies is a challenge to governments. Businesses are leading the development and implementation of AI and automated decision-making systems. Big tech retains data, controls the content and validation of informational content, and with their dominant position are able to influence the terms of public debate. Responsible states have no other choice but to regulate digital development, regulate the private sector, and interrogate certain business models and practices. The United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights are especially relevant for a rights-based regulatory framework for AI and the assessment of its human rights impacts. Companies must be obligated to perform human rights due diligence, irrespective of their size, and to monitor their human rights impact in a continuous manner. Victims of human rights abuses should have access to judicial remedy with effective sanctions. There's so much to be said and so much work to be done. I very much look forward to this forum and trust that the statements, experiences, and recommendations which the experts, activists, and human rights defenders provide will be put to effective use and feed into appropriate legislative and oversight frameworks. I thank you.